Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Saints Row 2 for PC, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. This is a third-person shooter by Volition Inc. that was published by THQ in 2008 for console and 2009 for PC. And the PC version was known universally as an absolutely horrendous port. There were all sorts of problems with it that they never fixed. So, you have to also keep in mind, I'm reviewing the PC version. So, if there's anything that seems like, wait a minute, I didn't find this issue, you're playing the console version. PC version is a whole other level. So, I'll get to that in a minute. But just understand that. I went into this thing from Saints Row the 3rd. And I actually quite liked Saints Row the 3rd. I thought it was kind of high-priced for what it was. But I enjoyed it. And it surprised the hell out of me considering I don't normally like this genre. And people kept saying, oh, Saints Row 2 is way better. It's so much more fun. And so I figured, maybe there's some truth to that. And so I got this, and I made the mistake of getting the PC version. Mostly because it was on sale for about $5. So, was my purchase price worth it? Well, let's find out. As far as the visuals go, they certainly didn't impress me at all, and part of this was because it is an open world game, and I understand that they have to cut down on visuals in order to get proper performance out of it, but there's a pretty big problem with that, and I'll get to that in a moment. So what you end up having with this game is modeling that's generally pretty solid, especially for characters and cars, but for guns is kind of blocky, and it just looks weird here and there. You'll just notice some models that seem kind of out of place, like they were from a game several years older than it actually is. You also get very, very low-res textures for the most part that are really just pixelated. In a lot of cases, you'll just look at them and be like, ooh, that looks awful. The colors are all washed out, and I don't know why that is. I mean, it could just be that shaders and such are screwed up on PC. I don't particularly know. From what I've seen of the console version, it doesn't look any better, so it must be that. Just the game itself was designed that way. But the texture work is pretty bad for the most part. There are things here and there that look okay, but for the most part, textures are pretty low res and very undetailed. You also have environments that do have a lot of stuff in them, but there's a lot of pop-in because the draw distance is actually pretty short for a game like this. So you'll have a lot of things fading in really quickly, and so it just looks odd until you get really used to it. You do have a decent physics engine, though. I mean, it does have a lot of things moving around in the environment, like you can run over things, and like fences will break apart and such like that. And so they did a decent job with that. But there's a really big problem with all of the visuals. At best, they're mediocre. But when you combine them with the fact that this game runs like utter crap, then there's a serious problem. I put this thing on the absolute lowest graphics settings to try to get some performance out of it, and it didn't help. In fact, it ran no better than when I had it on absolute maximum. And the only way I could determine why it was like this was it's just a really poorly optimized game. And as such, you get just terrible performance on no matter what your system is. I have yet to see a single PC version of this game run well on any rig I've ever seen. I've just never seen it. Tons of problems with frame rate. In particular, I was struggling to get 20 frames a second. To give you a comparison, my system maxes Crysis in DirectX 10 mode, and it gets roughly 40 to 50 frames a second. Yeah. This game's running at best at about 25 to 30 frames a second. It's smooth at about 30. It's playable at about 25. And for the most part, it's running 15 to 20. It's horrible. Try to react to things when it's just running at 15 to 20 frames a second. You just can't. It's just horrendous that the performance is this bad when the graphics were sacrificing so much. Now keep in mind, console version runs perfectly fine. So, if you're playing it on console, you don't have that problem. You're like, well, what are you talking about? It runs fine. On console, on PC, it doesn't. So, that's a pretty big trade-off right there. You have pretty weak visuals, and yet it still just runs like crap. That's just plain depressing. But then there's the sound design, which is much, much better than the visuals. On the one hand, you have the licensed soundtrack, which is pretty good for the most part. I mean, I don't like a lot of the tracks, just because I'm not into that style of music. It has quite a bit of hip-hop, some other music as well that they threw in there, some classical. Of course, they've got the classical station. They've got the classic rock station, which plays such greats as Everybody Wants to Rule the World and Down Under. So when you're rampaging around to Men at Work's classic song, and it's kind of goofy. And so you've got this nice soundtrack going with the game. You've also got some pretty solid voice acting. I mean, it's not amazing by any stretch of the imagination, but they did a pretty decent job with what they had, and I do have to applaud them for that. There are some voices here and there that are just really, really bad, though, but they're pretty few and far between, so they don't really bring down the experience all that much. And then there's the sound effects themselves, which for the most part are pretty solid. I mean, cars and other vehicles sound pretty good. They actually sound like vehicles like they should, as opposed to just kind of cheesy imitations and such like that. Guns in particular sound average, and that's kind of the problem. I mean, they do quite a bit of damage because I end up getting headshots most of the time, and so when I'm sitting there firing, say, a Desert Eagle and it doesn't sound very powerful, it just kind of takes me a little bit out of the experience. I wish they could have done something to improve the sound effects themselves, make them a bit more beefy. Shotguns, for instance, just don't sound all that powerful, and that's a little bit depressing, because a shotgun is really, really powerful. So that's a little bit of a problem, but it's nothing that'll really just take you out of the experience too much. But then you come to the story and the gameplay, and these are the most important bits. Now, the story takes place after the events of Saints Row 1, and you have fallen into a coma since then, and you wake up. So when you wake up, you go back to Stillwater to find that the Saints have fallen apart without you to lead them, and so you have to bring them back up from square one and defeat 3 rival gangs, which are the Ronin, the Brotherhood, and the Sons of Samdi. So you had to defeat these guys in order to bring the Saints back to power and control Stillwater. And all the while you're doing this, the Ultor Corporation is, of course, up to no good, and there's little dealings in between factions as well. There's nothing really complicated about the plot, but it ends up not being all that powerful. Mostly because it never really figures out what it wants to be. And I say this because you have bits of characterization at the beginning of the game where it's like, oh, well, this character is established as so-and-so, and this character is established as so-and-so. Characters never really progress beyond those initial establishments. Like, for instance, Shondi. They never progress beyond Shondi just has sex with pretty much every guy she meets, and apparently nobody likes Pierce. Those are their big shticks. That's it. That's all that's to those characters, really, in Saints Row 2. And so that's kind of a problem, because you end up not really caring about these characters at all. And, of course, Johnny Gad gets probably the best intro of them all, because he's on trial for 1 count of attempted murder and 350 counts of murder when you find him. So you end up going in there and getting him out, and it's like, okay, this character is actually kind of cool. Oh, wait, he's not in half the game. Yeah, I'm not kidding. He's not in most of this game. He's through one gang track of the storyline, and that's kind of it. The other tracks deal with different characters, and there's one who is just this kind of generic character that you never really get much characterization for, and they try to pull this really just emotional moment with him, and it just falls flat on its face, because you just don't care. And that's one of the really big problems with this game. It never figures out whether it wants to be serious or fully commit to being silly. And it just teeter-totters all the way throughout the game on this line. It at points is really silly, at points it's serious, and you just kind of get whiplash from it. Like, it'll constantly crack jokes, but then it throws in these elements that are very serious, and you're just sitting there like, well, wait a minute, I was just, skydiving through a exploding building, and yet now it's going to give me this emotional cutscene of a funeral or something like that? What? What? And so it never fully commits to being silly, and that's its big problem in terms of tone. There's so much wasted potential there. They could have just gone completely over the top and made it way more fun. But instead, they kind of just held back, and it really shows in a lot of spots where they could have gone really silly and made it much more fun, but there's just something there that they lack. And that's something that I really liked about Saints Row 3. They just completely cut loose and had fun. This one, they held back, and it just shows throughout the game. But that's not the main problem I had with this game. It wasn't that it wasn't silly enough, because I can deal with that, actually. It would have been fine if the game itself wasn't utter crap. Now, keep in mind, I am playing the PC version, so this factors in considerably. 1. Controls are terrible for driving. And this is on PC, so I'm playing on keyboard and mouse. It may be much better on an analog stick gamepad. So, just keep that in mind. Driving controls are terrible, because your cars feel like they just handle weirdly. It's hard to describe how they handle, because I can't really comprehend how they handle. Some of them you can turn fairly well, they move at a decent rate, and you can actually keep control of them for the most part. Some of them go ridiculously fast, and when you try to turn, suddenly you have made a full 360. And this is just, everything runs the gamut there. And if you're on a bike, good luck. You're going to go flying, because you're going to crash into everything. And that's one of the really big problems I have with this game. I kept crashing into everything, and I kept wondering why. And when I did some experiments to try to find out, I would very lightly tap the steering controls where you would turn left or right, and it would turn at pretty wide increments. So I realized that there wasn't any fine control to the cars on a keyboard. Like I said, on an analog stick, this is probably much better. But this becomes a really, really big problem on PC when you're trying to turn and suddenly you've turned into an object that you can't run over. So that was one of those really big issues that just drove me nuts the entire game. On top of this, you don't really get many flying vehicles. Good luck flying half of them, though. Helicopters are actually fine. Jets, on the other hand, planes, you're going to crash a lot. And they just handle like they're made of lead. They just do not turn well. So you'll end up crashing into objects all the time. Drives me nuts. Anyway, driving controls aside, everything else kind of controls okay. But there's some serious issues on the PC version. Like, it'll just stop registering button presses. Like, you'll hold down move forward, and sometimes it'll just stop moving. Just in the middle of moving forward, you just stop, and you'll be like, wait, what just happened? And you'll keep holding the button, and your character just won't move. So you let go of the button, you press it again, and you move forward again. It makes no sense. There's just a lot of really just big problems with the PC controls. I don't know what's wrong with them. I mean, aiming and shooting is fine. It's just movement is a really big issue. It's twitchy. And that becomes a very serious issue when you're trying to avoid things or dodge things or stuff like that, or even when you're trying to drive and suddenly your accelerator stops, even though you're holding the forward button down, and it just gets really irritating. On top of this, the missions are designed as such. You have to drive from point A to point B, and of course to just find the mission, and then you're going to have to drive somewhere else, because that's just what they do. Apparently they really like driving places in this game. And so your missions will be fairly simple for the most part. They'll be fairly short. In fact, I would venture a guess as to the story actually being around 8 to 10 hours. But you might notice that I've played it for longer than that. And the simple reason for that is the game forces you to do the side missions. Why? You have to fill your respect meter to unlock the story missions. And once you've filled it up, you get a indicator that says basically ×1, ×2, etc., etc., so on and so forth. And this is how many times you've filled the meter. If the meter is filled up, you can go on a story mission. If it's not, then you have to go do side missions or just do things around the city to earn respect points and fill up that meter. And this is just arbitrary. They shouldn't have put this in here. Why? It breaks the flow of the game. Now, If you want to run around and do all the side missions and stuff, that's up to you. And the game supports that. It's perfectly fine. But the main problem I have with these side missions is that they're required to actually finish the game. Because there's no way in hell you're going to get enough respect points just from running around and doing stuff in any amount of time that's going to be decent. I mean, I don't have a huge amount of time on my hands to just play games anymore. And so that was just getting really annoying that I would have to go on these side missions and earn respect points just so I can play through the story. Why do they do that? I just don't get it. It's a really irritating thing, especially when the side missions are all very samey. I mean, there's racing, there's more racing, depending on what vehicle you're doing. I mean, it could be boats, it could be planes, good luck doing that. It could be cars, it could be bikes, it could be anything. And there's just different racing missions, and you can do those. There's mayhem, which is what I usually did, because you just blow the living crap out of everything, and you try to get as much destruction as possible. There's a couple of mini-games that were included in Saints Row 3, like the insurance fraud one, where you just run around and let yourself get damaged as much as possible. So they do have stuff like that, and some of those things are okay, but a lot of them, because of the controls, just end up being problematic. I mean, when you have all of these enemies just coming out of nowhere, whenever you start causing havoc or something, it just gets really irritating when you're trying to fend these guys off and your controls just are completely against you the entire time. And that's just to say nothing of how annoying the controls are when you're just trying to go through the menus. Mouse doesn't work. It's keyboard only. So what ends up happening with that is that you have to go and hit Shift or Control to switch the tabs of the menu, and when you switch those controls, then you have to go and scroll down to the one that you want, and then hit Enter, and then it will let you do stuff. And while that works okay, it's something that just shouldn't be on a PC version of a game from 2008. They should have very easily implemented a mouse-based menu, and it would have been very easy to do, but they just didn't do it. And it just shows a very huge lack of effort put into this port at all. It's very obvious they didn't care. They put absolutely no effort into this port at all. In fact, I would be pressed to say that they put any effort at all into it, and just said, okay, release the PC version in its pre-alpha stage. That's what it feels like. It feels like a pre-alpha. It's extremely buggy, it's extremely glitchy, controls are all sorts of messed up. Graphics options don't really do anything except make the game worse or better looking, and that's not saying much. Performance is absolutely terrible. Mission structure is at best mediocre because it actually forces you to do those side missions, which if they were completely optional, I would have been fine with it. I would have been fine with them if they were completely optional, but since they're required, it bothers me. And the story missions themselves are actually okay for the most part, except there are a few here and there that are just really, really annoying. Like forcing you to do chase sequences when your driving controls are just completely against you the entire time. You keep crashing into everything, making you go on timed missions. It just gets extremely, extremely infuriating. Now, if I was playing this thing on console, it wouldn't be as bad. I know this for a fact. But I still wouldn't have enjoyed the game just based on the gameplay itself. I know that I wouldn't enjoy it because of these side mission requirements. I wouldn't enjoy it because that respect meter is just so weird. It just shouldn't be there. I wouldn't enjoy it because the mission structure is pretty samey for the most part. The game is really, really easy for the most part, unless you're dealing with, of course, control problems, or where the game will spontaneously kill you for apparently no reason, which happened to me a lot. Apparently a lot of people don't get those problems, but I have apparently just die all the time in this game. And I have no idea how. So, it's all sorts of things. And so, what I ended up having with this game was zero fun. In fact, I found it more irritating than any other game I've played in a very, very long time. Hence why it gets a 1 out of 5. Thanks for watching.